Your Honor, opposing counsel, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I'm Madeline King, and my co-counsel Karen Shen and I are here to represent the plaintiff of this case, Peyton Reynolds. On September 27, 2013, a horrible tragedy occurred to my client's child, Pat Reynolds, while she was attending the Metropolitan Youth Leadership Conference in Metropolitan, New Jersey. She was a good student at Smithville High School and was of good enough moral and academic fiber to be chosen not only her junior but also her senior year to represent her school at the conference. Unfortunately, she also suffers from dizzy spells. But her junior year, she had no issue while she was on this trip. She believed it would be the same way her senior year, but if ever true, we would not be here to find not only Mr. Dalton Fisher, but the Smithville School District grossly negligent in their lack of care. In a case of negligence, there are four components my co-counsel and I must prove to you, the first of which, the duty of care. The Smithville School District owes its chaperones proper training. Mr. Fisher did not receive proper training. He also was owed enough chaperones to cover the 15-to-1 student-teacher ratio. And the school district also owes the Parents Act, as well as the students. And the students are owed by the chaperones adequate assistance when needed. But the initial time Pat asked for help, after she started feeling dizzy, she was turned away. That brings me to my next point, the breach of care. The breach of duty, forgive me. Because Mr. Fisher had no training, and there were not enough chaperones to cover the 15-to-1 student-teacher ratio, somehow Mr. Fisher was rendered unavailable when Pat again asked him for help. Because of this, Pat and her roommate, Ms. Avery Harris, were forced to leave the hotel after realizing the vending machines were not available to them. They were not allowed to order room service, and all the restaurants were closed. And because of this, they had no choice but to leave. Today you will hear testimony from Ms. Harris, who will prove that Mr. Fisher was unavailable, and because of this, they had no other choice but to leave. Which brings me to my next point, the probable cause. Because of no training and not enough chaperones, Pat had to take matters into her own hands because Mr. Fisher was somehow rendered unavailable. And when she did, she had to leave the hotel. And when she left, she unfortunately hit her head. Today you will hear from her mother, Miss Peyton Reynolds, who will prove that her medical condition should have been brought to Dalton Fisher's attention. Which brings me to my final point, the actual harm. And because Pat hit her head, she is now in a coma, and the doctors are not sure if she will wake up. And finally, you will hear from Miss Bailey Thompson, who will prove that this entire situation could have been avoidable because the school district should have listened to its 15-to-1 student-teacher ratio and provided Mr. Fisher enough training. Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, my co-counsel and I are confident that after hearing the testimony, you will make the correct decision through a preponderance of evidence and find the Smithville School District and Mr. Dalton Fisher grossly negligent in their lack of care. Thank you.
Yes, Your Honor. I'd like to take you back to the first night of the 2013 Metropolitan Youth Leadership Conference. Not long after students have finished their workshops, it's time for curfew check, and Dalton Fisher goes room to room to make sure every student is where they're supposed to be. After checking all 10 rooms, he puts a strip of masking tape on the upper corner of each door. If a student were to leave their room, the masking tape would be damaged. Mr. Fisher would know that they broke the rules. Following school policy, he conducts his second curfew check at midnight. Not wanting to wake any of his students up, he checks to see the tape on the doors. Seeing that all the tape is intact, he goes to bed. What Mr. Fisher doesn't know, however, is that between his 2 curfew checks, Pat Reynolds and her roommate snuck out of the hotel. And after hours of wandering the streets of Metropolitan, Pat climbs on a wall, slips, and hits her head, causing her to fall into a coma. The plaintiff alleges negligence, arguing that what happened to Pat Reynolds is the fault of my client. The bulk of their case is going to rest on the testimony of one witness, Pat's roommate. She'll claim that on the night of the accident, Pat was suffering from dizzy spells, and they had no choice but to break curfew to find food to alleviate Pat's symptoms. However, you also learn that instead of heading to one of the several restaurants in the near vicinity, the roommates instead chose to wander the streets of Metropolitan until Pat climbed onto a wall and took a selfie rather than address her issue. You also learn that before the case, the roommate, keep in mind the plaintiff's main witness, intensely disliked Mr. Fisher. Her bias will be quite evident, calling everything she says into question. Now, later on, you'll also hear from Mr. Fisher himself. And when he testifies, you'll learn how he and the Smithville School District took every reasonable precautionary measure to ensure the safety of the students, starting with the collection of conference forms, permission slips, and relevant medical histories. Prior to the trip, all the students were required to attend an informational meeting, reinforcing what was to be expected of them on the trip. Mr. Fisher was trained twice on his duties, first by the head chaperone and then the superintendent. And on the trip, he reinforced the students of the rules several times. Mr. Fisher used a degree of care, precaution, vigilance that any reasonably prudent person would use under the same circumstances. In a negligence case, you must decide who is more responsible. The plaintiff must prove to you with preponderance of evidence that their series of claims is more likely true than not. However, the plaintiff will fail to meet their burden of proof. You must ask yourself, 1, did Mr. Fisher fulfill all his duties as a chaperone? 2, did Mr. Fisher follow all the conference rules? And 3, did Pat make her own decision to break the rules, leave the hotel after curfew, wander the streets of Metropolitan, and climb a wall while she was dizzy? The truth is, Mr. Fisher could not have done anything to prevent this accident. In fact, it would happen under anyone's care. It is unreasonable to believe that he could have watched the students every second of the day. Instead, it's the school district's responsibility to set up safeguards to dissuade bad behavior. For breaking curfew that night, Pat's roommate was ultimately suspended. As a jury, it is your duty to analyze the evidence and return a verdict that matches the truth. The defendant is not liable. Thank you.
At this time, I'd ask the prosecution to call their first witness.
Thank you, Your Honor. The plaintiff calls its first witness, Ms. Avery Harris, to the stand.
Raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you are about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do. Good evening, Ms. Harris. Good evening. Where were you on the night of September 27th, 2013?
I was at the Metropolitan Youth Leadership Conference.
And how do you know Pat Reynolds?
Pat Reynolds was my roommate during this conference.
And were you two acquaintances?
Yes, we didn't know each other that well before the conference, but we spent a lot of time together.
Did she ask you to be roommates on this trip?
Yes, she did.
Let's move on to the first night, the first day of the conference. Were you busy?
Yes, the teachers at this conference love to talk, and all the students love to ask them questions, so the conferences went on for a really long time.
And that night, what time was dinner?
At about 5 p.m.
And after dinner, were you told specifically by your chaperone where to retire for the night?
The chaperone, Mr. Fisher, kind of offhandedly made a remark that we shouldn't be leaving our rooms to go to some type of campus party. But other than that, he didn't really stress the importance of this room.
And what time was Pat starting to not feel well?
At around 10:30, when we were going to the elevator to head up to our hotel rooms, Pat told me that she wasn't doing well.
Did she attempt to notify anyone else?
Well, she told me that she let Dalton Fisher know.
And let's move on to the curfew check tonight. What time was the first curfew check?
At around 11 p.m., Mr. Fisher came to check our rooms.
And how did he perform this curfew check?
Well, I was in the bathroom, so I didn't exactly see him, but I heard him speaking to Pat right outside the door, and Pat told him that I was in the bathroom.
Just to clarify, he didn't physically check to see if you were in the room?
No, he didn't wait for me to get out of the bathroom, so I never actually saw him.
And was Pat still not feeling well afterwards?
Yes, she still didn't feel well at all.
And did she attempt to notify anyone again?
Well, she left the hotel room and then went to find Mr. Fisher, but she came back and the problem wasn't solved, so I assumed she would get a hold of him. That's what she said.
And what did you do? What did you and Pat do afterwards?
Well, I suggested that we go downstairs to the gift shops and see if we can get any food there. But the gift shops were closed by then because it was around 11:25 at night.
Could you have ordered room service?
No. Mr. Fisher made it a big deal that we don't order any room service because he doesn't want to deal with the hassle of paying for anything more since the rooms are already prepaid.
And vending machines. Were there any in the hotel?
Well, we did look around the room floor for vending machines, but there were vending machines across the elevator, but they only sold beverages, so that wasn't much help since we had tap water in our hotel.
And what happened after you realized all of these options would not help?
Well, I realized that we had to take the matter into our own hands after about an hour of searching for Mr. Fisher. So we left the hotel to find a restaurant that Pat said that she knew exactly where it was, about 2 blocks away from the hotel, some fast food place.
And what happened after you decided to leave the hotel?
Well, we walked to where we thought the restaurant was, and it turned out it wasn't there. So I was like, okay, we have to go back to the hotel. So right before we left to go back to the hotel, Pat said that she was feeling better because the air was clear and it made, kind of reduced her dizzy spells. But I said, no matter what, when we get back to the hotel, we're ordering room service. No matter if Mr. Fisher gets mad, we have to, because I knew that it was better to have her feel better than to not deal with the hassle. But so right before we turned back to the hotel, she saw a billboard that she really liked. So she jumped up on a wall and took a picture with the billboard, and that's when she fell.
And what did you do after your roommate fell?
Well, right after, I called for help.
Did you call anyone else?
Yeah, I called Mrs. Reynolds as well.
Did you call your chaperone?
I couldn't call Mr. Fisher because I didn't have his phone number.
Did he ever give emergency contact information?
No, if he did, it would have solved the problem way before having to leave the hotel.
Objection. Holding the question.
Excuse me?
Holding the question.
You object?
Holding the issue, excuse me.
Okay. Would you like to respond?
I was merely asking if Mr. Fisher ever gave the emergency contact information. My witness provided extra information than was required.
I'll overrule the objection. I don't think the question itself was objectionable. I think you're more objecting to the answer than you are to the question.
Yes, Your Honor.
We will direct the witness to answer the questions that are asked. Thank you.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Counsel, are you ready for cross?
Yes, Your Honor.
Thank you.
So you had Dalton as a teacher before?
Yes, during my sophomore year.
In fact, you got your lowest grade in this class.
Yeah, all my grades are pretty bad though, so it's not like it matters.
And you butted heads with him?
I would say so.
You claim that he preached policy, is that correct?
Yeah, he did.
You also said that he was like the guy in The Beautiful Mind, making connections where they didn't exist.
I would say so.
You also said he didn't have to work a day of his life, and that he was a trust fund baby.
Yes, he was.
In fact, you said he wasn't even much of a human being. Is that correct?
Yep, we did not get along.
Now, during the first night of the conference, Pat was suffering from dizzy spells, and that's why you and Pat decided to leave the hotel. Is that correct?
Yes, that is true.
She said there was a restaurant in your vicinity.
Yes, that's absolutely.
May I approach the witness with Joint Exhibit 3?
Yes, ma'am.
This is the map of the hotel and surrounding area. Is that correct?
Yes, that is true.
In the upper right-hand corner is Metropolitan University. Is that correct?
Yes.
And that blue line is a path that you and Pat drew, and you drew it. Is that correct?
Yes, that's the half.
And the star is where Pat fell. Is that correct?
Yes, that's true.
So, is it true that the line that you drew is going directly towards Metropolitan University?
I wasn't familiar with the campus at the time, so I actually had no idea that we were campus was there.
Did you have a cousin at Metropolitan University?
Yes, my cousin Bruce.
And in your affidavit, you said that you were familiar with the campus. Is that correct?
No, I didn't say that I was familiar with the campus. I had visited him a couple of times, but we never really went out, so I didn't say much of the campus.
May I approach the witness with Joint Exhibit D1? Your Honor.
Yes.
Is this your deposition?
Yes, it is.
And it's true to the best of your knowledge?
Yes.
I direct you to line 130. Can you read silently as I read out loud? Question. You go to Metropolitan University currently. Do you have any familiarity with the university last September? Your answer was, well, my cousin Brucey was already going there last year. But going to visit Brucey at his dorm a couple times to be familiar, and I guess the answer is yes. Did I read that correctly?
Yes, that's true.
Thank you. So you were,
Okay.
thank you. So you were familiar with the campus.
The campus, but not the area around the hotel. I was not familiar.
But regardless, you and Pat were walking straight in the direction of Metropolitan University. Is that correct?
Well, I guess I was familiar with the campus. I didn't know how to get there.
After you left the hotel, you took a left on 2nd Street. Is that correct?
Yes.
And then you turned right on Park Place. Is that correct?
Yes.
And then you turned left again.
Yes.
And then you turned right.
Yes.
And if you were to continue going straight, you would have been right at the doorstep of Metropolitan University. Is that correct?
Yep, I guess so, but it was pretty dark, so I didn't really...
Thank you. So earlier you said that Pat was suffering from dizzy spells around 11:30.
Yeah, well, she actually started to feel dizzy spells at 10:30.
And you spent some time before you left the hotel, is that correct?
Yes.
So you left around midnight?
Yes.
And you didn't get back around 2:30 to 3 o'clock?
Yep, well, she was injured, so...
So how long did it take for you to walk those 3 blocks?
Well, if you realize it was in the middle of the night, so we had no idea where we were going. Like I mentioned before, I was familiar with the campus and where Brucey had brought me, but I had no idea how to get from the Metropolitan Hotel to any restaurant. And as you can see, we obviously didn't find the restaurant, so we knew that we had to go back.
But how long did it take you to walk those 3 blocks?
Well, it was around a year ago. I'd say it took us about an hour to find out where Pat thought the restaurant was.
And in your own words, right before Pat fell, she said she was feeling dizzy. Is that correct?
Yes.
Thank you. No further questions.
Redirect?
Not necessary, Your Honor.
Witness, please step down. Thank you. At this time, I'll invite the prosecution to call their second witness.
Thank you, Your Honor. Plaintiff calls next witness, Ms. Dean Reynolds, to the stand.
For affirm that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes. Good evening, Ms. Reynolds.
Good evening.
And what is your relation to Pat Reynolds?
I am her mother.
Let's talk about her medical history. Does your daughter suffer from any medical conditions?
She suffers from baby cells.
And for how long has she been suffering from these?
A few years now.
And how does she combat the symptoms?
Well, we've noticed that food has tended to help the symptoms.
And does she take any medication?
Yes, she does. She takes Alidus.
And for how long has she been taking Alidus?
Well, it was prescribed August 10th, 2013. So, about a month or so before the whole incident.
And did anyone at the school know of her medical condition?
Yes, the school nurse did.
Let's talk about the form you were given prior to this trip. On what day were you given the form to fill out?
September 20th, 2013.
And when was it due to the school?
It was due the next day.
And let's talk about the day before the trip, the 26th. Were you given any additional information by the school?
No.
Were you given any additional information at all?
Yes, Pat called me that day, and she called me to tell me that Dana Hughes would no longer be going on the trip due to a medical emergency.
And did Pat tell you anything else?
Yes. She sounded really dejected, so no, she didn't tell me anything else. But from her tone, she sounded really dejected. So I decided that because the trip had so many great opportunities associated with it, I decided to call the principal's office, and Mr. Jameson Manning ended up picking up the phone, and I told him about the hotel's
Objection, narrative. The witness is now narrating an answer.
Forgive me, Your Honor. I can't really argue against that. Sorry.
Sustained.
And who picked up the phone? Forgive me. Who picked up the phone again?
The superintendent, Mr. Jameson Manning.
And what did you tell him on the phone?
I told him about the hotel's 20-to-1 student-to-chaperone ratio.
Let's talk about the food policy on this trip. Was your daughter allowed to bring any food on the bus?
No, she was not.
Was she allowed to purchase food at any point on this trip?
Yes, once arriving at the hotel, they were allowed to buy some food from the convenience stores nearby.
And did this ever occur?
No, it did not.
And who told you this?
Avery Harris.
And I know it may be hard for you, but could you please describe to the court what your daughter's medical condition is currently?
Well, she's still in a coma, and the doctors are not really sure if she's going to wake up.
And did you receive any phone calls notifying you of your daughter's medical condition?
Yes, I did. I received one from Avery Harris. I also received one from the superintendent, Jameson.
And when did you receive Ms. Harris's call?
Around 3 a.m.
And when did you receive Mr. Manning's phone call?
A little while later, once my daughter was gone.
And how did you feel after receiving the phone call from Mr. Manning?
I was very annoyed. Why hadn't he called me first? Why wasn't he with my daughter when the incident happened? What was going on? Why was my daughter alone in this big city?
And did you ever receive a phone call from Mr. Fisher?
No, I did not, which I thought was really rude considering he was the sole chaperone on the trip and what happened to my daughter.
And why are you bringing this case to court?
I'm solely bringing this case to court because I want this to not happen to any parent ever. This has been terrible. My daughter might not even wake up from her coma, and I want no parent to go through this nightmare.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Yes, Your Honor. Pat is a generally good kid, right?
Yes.
she was pre-selected to go on the Metropolitan Youth Leadership Conference trip, is that right?
She was.
Generally responsible as a student?
Yeah.
But do responsible teenagers still make mistakes sometimes, or still break the rules sometimes?
I guess so, but like, responsible students are not supposed to.
But regardless, they still do break the rules.
Objection, Your Honor, speculation.
Your Honor, the witness is a parent of a teenager and would therefore know whether or not some teenagers do break rules.
I'm going to sustain the objection. Keep your questions to the girl herself rather than asking the witness what teenagers in general do.
Yes, sir. Now, after you had found out that Dana Hughes had gotten sick, you called the superintendent, Dr. James Amin.
Yes, I did.
And he informed you that the trip might get canceled because there was a 15-to-1 student-to-teacher ratio requirement for trips. Is that right?
I think so, yes.
But you really wanted Pat to attend the conference.
Yes, because there's so many great opportunities with it. There were scholarship opportunities that were possible, and due to my recent separation, I thought that'd be great for Pat. And she was a senior, and she was going to college soon. So there were a lot of great opportunities associated with the trip. That's why I did it.
And you were the one who told Dr. Manning about the 20-to-1 policy. Is that right?
Yes.
Now, food is what makes Pat feel better when she's feeling dizzy. Is that right?
Yes.
Anything with sugar would have helped her?
I'm not 100% sure. I mean, it was just food in general that really helped.
And you knew that Pat wouldn't have been able to bring food on this trip, is that right?
I did, but they were able to buy food from convenience stores once arriving at the hotel. So I really didn't worry about that.
But you did not give her any food on the trip, is that
Because
right?
I wasn't allowed to.
And you were the one who filled out the permission slip for this trip, is that right?
I was.
Permission to approach the 20-to-1.
Permission granted.
Is this the permission slip you filled out?
Yes.
And on this page, please read alongside me as I read aloud. Please note any concerns of which the document should be aware. Did I read that correctly?
Yes.
Did you leave that box blank?
I did.
You? And once again, you did not list food in that box, is that right?
No, because food is a basic necessity of life. I didn't think I needed to tell the school and the chaperones that they needed to feed my kids.
But this was not just. You did not tell the school that you needed food for a medical reason. Is that right?
No.
Thank you. No further questions.
Redirect.
Not necessary.
Witness may sit down. Thank you. The plaintiffs may call their third witness.
Thank you, Your Honor. The plaintiff calls up its third witness of the Bailey Thompson district.
Raise your right hand. You solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Good evening, Ms. Thompson.
Good evening.
Now, what do you currently work at?
I'm currently the owner and founder of ET Educational Services.
And what do you do at the Educational Services?
We consult and advise school districts, and we also help school districts with legal and curricular issues.
Did you have any other jobs before ET Educational Services?
Yes, I first worked as an elementary school teacher, and later on I became a vice principal and principal of the same school where I taught, and I was also given the opportunity to be a superintendent.
So based on your overall experience, what field do you specialize in?
I specialize in the field of educational leadership, policy, and practice.
And how many years have you had in total in this field?
I've had in total 34 years.
And Your Honor, just a reminder that Ms. Bailey Thompson has been stipulated as an expert in educational leadership, policy, and practice. Ms. Thompson, why are you testifying today?
I'm testifying today because the plaintiff had asked me to look at the circumstances involved in the Metropolitan Youth Leadership Conference, and also I was asked to provide my expertise on the policies that the Smithville School District has.
What materials, if any, were you given to prepare for this case?
I was given the Smithville School District Field Trip Procedures as well as information
permission form, and I was also able to review the permission before the school.
So when you analyze these documents for sufficiency, what do you look for?
I look to make sure that a school district provides proper training for their chaperones, and also if they have prescribed procedures days or even weeks before the trip, and see if they can change policies in the future, and also if they can hold staff accountable for their decisions.
So based on your overall analysis, does the Smithville School District have complete enough procedures to ensure the safety of the students?
No, absolutely not.
And how was it incomplete?
Well, there seems to be no policy set in place that require the chaperones to make follow-up checks on students with medical issues to ensure that they are properly protected.
On your permission, to approach the witness with Joint Exhibit 2.
Of course.
Ms. Thompson, are you familiar with this document?
Yes, I am.
What is it?
It is the Smithville School District Field Trip Procedures.
So you said this is incomplete, so what is it missing?
What is missing is that the chaperones are only required to be aware of the medical issues, but there's nothing on how they should actually handle any emergency situation during the trip.
And is there any way for students to let the school know about medical issues?
Yes, they can tell the school through the permission form.
Is there any indication that the chaperone, Mr. Fisher, has seen these forms?
No, there was no signature on file that he had actually seen the form. In fact, Mrs. Dana Hughes, who was supposed to be the other chaperone on this trip, had signed the majority of the requirements on the procedures. And he only signed regarding Mr. Dalton Fisher.
And just to clarify, so the Smithville School District does not have any established policies on dealing with medical emergencies?
Yes.
Was there any other paperwork that the students had to fill out?
It was just the permission form that they had to fill out.
And when was this permission form given?
It was given on September 20th, 2013.
And how much time did the students have to fill out this form?
They were given less than a week to fill out this form.
Now, how much time do you recommend that students have to fill out forms?
I recommend that students receive a minimum of 2 weeks to fill out the form.
Were there any other issues regarding the running of this trip?
Yes. They didn't even follow their own policy regarding chaperone coverage.
Now, what was their policy regarding chaperone coverage?
They had a policy of 15:1, which is the student to chaperone ratio.
And how many students were on this trip?
There were 20 students that attended the trip.
So, just to clarify, did the school violate its own policy?
Yes, they did.
Now, how many students or how many chaperones do you recommend for a trip like this?
I recommend that there should be a student to chaperone ratio of 10 to 1 on this trip.
Now, for this sole chaperone that went on the trip, did the Smithville School District provide enough training for him?
After reviewing Mr. Dalton Fisher's deposition, I came to the conclusion that the school district did not take any major actions to provide them with skills necessary for dangerous situations.
And were there any other issues regarding the running of the trip?
Yes, the chaperones were not required to provide emergency contact information for themselves. And in addition, there were no signatures on file that stated that the chaperones actually saw the medical issues involved with students on the permission form.
Based on your expert opinion, did Dalton Fisher act properly on the trip?
No, I believe that his communication was inadequate.
How was it inadequate?
There is at least one known instance where he did not open a door for a student at an absolutely necessary time. And also there is even enough evidence to warrant an investigation into whether he's actually present at the hotel.
And based on
Objection, assumes facts, not evidence.
this is based on,
I'm sorry.
well, this was just based on her analysis of the documents provided her and the depositions given her.
I'm going to overrule that objection.
Thank you, Your Honor. Ms. Thompson, also based on your expert opinion, did the Smithville School District run this trip properly?
No, I don't think they planned this trip properly. They should not have changed their policy at the very last minute so suddenly. This not only put the students in serious danger, but also the chaperones and the entire school district in serious danger.
Thank you. No more further questions, Your Honor.
Counsel, you want to do your cross?
Yes, I'm here. You criticized the Smithville School District's medical procedure regarding field trips, is that right?
Yes.
And you reviewed all the permission slips for this field trip, including the permission slip of the plaintiff, in fact, yes?
Yes.
Permission to approach the dwellings of the lawn?
Yes.
This is the permission slip filled out by the plaintiff, is that right?
Yes, that is.
And on the second page, does it ask for a list of illnesses? Does it ask for a list of allergies or medications?
Yes.
Does it ask for parents to write down any concerns the chaperone should be aware of?
Well, yes, it does.
Does it ask for any medication, prescription, or over the counter?
Yes.
Is a medication listed here by the plaintiff?
Yes.
Is the doctor's name, signature, and phone number listed here?
Yes.
And you also recommend that schools give at least 2 weeks to fill out this permission slip?
Yes, they do.
And how long did Smithville give for this permission slip?
They gave him less than a week.
However, was there any information on this permission slip you found to be inaccurate?
No, but it didn't say specifically to provide information about things like food, or food is a basic necessity.
Your Honor, I ask that the witness's answer be stricken as not responsive.
My witness has responded to your question regarding the question.
I asked if any information had been filled out incorrectly on the permission form, and the witness did not testify as to whether or not there was inaccurate information, but what the permission slip did not ask.
I'm going to sustain that objection.
So, did you find any information on this permission slip to be inaccurate, yes or no? Now, you also criticized Dalton Fisher because he did not sign any of the field trip procedure forms, is that right? And you reviewed the list of field trip procedure forms for the Smithville School District, is that right? Permission to approach the dwellings of the two?
Yes.
Is this the Smithville School District field trip procedures form?
Yes.
And this lists all the expectations of chaperones on the field trips, is that right?
Yes.
And on the same document, is that Dalton Fisher's signature? Is that also Dalton Fisher's signature? You also criticized Dalton Fisher because he did not properly warn students about a nearby college party during the trip.
Yes.
How did you find out about this college party going on?
I found out through the witness's deposition that everything was prior to this case.
Did you read this in Avery Harris's deposition?
Yes.
Are you aware that when Avery Harris mentioned this, that he was referencing how Mr. Fisher told the students not to go to said college party?
Well, he wasn't very clear, as Avery Harris was stating.
But he did tell the students that he should not go to the college party at some point on the trip, is that right?
Yes, but again, he wasn't very clear.
And your BT Educational Services is the company you own is a private company, is that right?
Yes.
And you were paid by the plaintiff $500 per hour to work on this case? Thank you. No further questions.
Redirect?
Yes, Your Honor. May I approach the witness who is going to exhibit 2?
Yes, you may.
Going back to the field trip procedures checklist. Who signed the majority of the lines?
We didn't see that he was at the majority.
And which requirements did Fisher sign?
Just the requirement that regarded the attendance and also an evaluation after the trip.
So nothing about medical,
No.
nothing, any of that. And now, did the school violate its student to chaperone policy?
Yes, it did.
Thank you. No further questions.
Recross?
Yes, Your Honor. Just to be clear, how many times was Dalton Fisher's signature on the form that the plaintiff just read?
Just twice.
Thank you. No further questions.
This may step down. Does the plaintiff express their case at this time?
Yes, Your Honor.
Defense, if you would like to call your witness?
Yes, Your Honor. The plaintiff would like to call Dr. Jason Annie to the stand. Oh, sorry, the defense would like to call Dr. Jason Annie to the stand.
Raise your right hand. Solemnly swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Yes.
What do you do for a living?
I'm the superintendent of the Smithville School District and have been for the past 16 years.
And what jobs did you have prior to becoming a superintendent?
I was an English and history teacher at 2 metropolitan high schools. I later became the assistant principal at the Smithville Middle School and then was promoted to principal at that school.
And what education did you receive for these jobs?
I received my bachelor's degree in education and my master's and doctorate degrees in educational leadership.
Your Honor, at this time I ask the court to recognize Dr. James Manning as an expert in educational policy, practice, and leadership.
So recognized.
How are you involved with this case?
Superintendent of the Smithville School District, I oversaw the logistics of the Smithville Young Leaders Club field trip to the Metropolitan Youth Leadership Conference.
When did the board begin planning for this field trip?
At a board meeting in August of 2013, the board voted on and approved the field trip to the Metropolitan Youth Leadership Conference.
Were chaperones approved for this trip?
Yes, the chaperone voted on to be in charge of the trip was Dana Hughes, and the other chaperone was Dalton Fisher.
And what issues, if any, arose regarding this trip?
Unfortunately, a few weeks before the students were to go onto the trip, the chaperone in charge, Dana Hughes, became ill with appendicitis and had to cancel.
What was going to happen to the trip?
At first, it did seem like the trip was not going to happen due to the school's 15-to-1 student-to-teacher ratio, but that wasn't until I received the call from Peyton Reynolds.
What was discussed during this call?
She informed me that the conference had a student-to-teacher ratio of 20-to-1. I called the head of security at the hotel, Casey Damon, and the 20-to-1 policy was confirmed. He also informed me that the hotel will be bringing in extra security for this conference.
Now what was going to happen to the trip?
After talking to the board president, the trip was approved.
And how far away is Smithville from Metropolitan?
Only about 30 minutes or so. This meant that I or another administrator could come if any issues arose.
And did any issues arise?
Yes. Unfortunately, on the first night of the conference, one of our students, Pat Reynolds, tragically fell off a ledge and was injured.
What did you do upon finding out?
I received the call at about 3 a.m. I then rushed to the hospital and arrived there at about 3:30 a.m.
What did you do next?
I spoke to Dalton Fisher, who was at the hotel with the students watching over them.
What did you and Dalton discuss?
Dalton told me about parties that were supposed to happen that night at Metropolitan University. He informed the students and let them know that they were in no way allowed to attend these parties.
Now, in your expert opinion, did Dalton fulfill all his duties as chaperone?
I see absolutely no problem with how Dalton handled the situation. It's very unfortunate that Pat and Avery decided to sneak out of the hotel that night, and it's tragic that Pat had to be injured.
Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions.
Cross.
Thank you. Good evening.
Thank you.
What is your student-to-teacher ratio?
15-to-1 for most trips. That's what we usually go with.
And how many students were going on this trip?
20 students.
And how many chaperones wound up going?
Only one chaperone, but other administrators were on call, including myself.
Isn't it true that you could have gone yourself?
I could not have gone myself. I was not available for every day of the conference, but I was available to be on call for many days.
Do you have an assistant?
I do have assistants that work with me.
Do any of them could have been on call?
They could not make it. Some of them were on call and some other teachers were on call, but there was no other teacher or administrator that could make it for the full conference.
And did you notify, isn't it true that you were going to cancel the trip?
That was true at first, but upon talking to the board president and Peyton Reynolds, we did allow the trip.
And again, you did say you talked to Peyton Reynolds. Why would you listen to a parent who has no authority over you?
She wasn't saying anything or trying to give authority over me. She just informed me about the 20-to-1 student-to-teacher policy that the conference had. And with this information, I went to the head of security at the hotel and we approved the trip.
And again, you did listen to Peyton Reynolds' suggestion, correct?
It wasn't a suggestion. She simply gave me information that I later used.
And isn't it true that you notified the board president?
I did notify the board president.
And did you notify anyone else?
The board president said that he would inform the rest of the board.
And do you know if that happened at all?
To the best of my knowledge, it did happen.
And isn't it true that you ultimately had made the decision to break your own policy?
I did not break my own policy. I, in this case, made a decision that was the most practical to allow the trip to happen. I made this decision along with the Board of Education as well. It was not my decision alone.
There's nothing really more to say. No further questions.
Redirect?
No, Your Honor.
Witness is sit down. Thank you. If the defense will call their second witness.
Yes, Your Honor, the defense called Casey Davis to stand.
Raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give us is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Yes. Please be seated.
Mr. David, what do you do for a living?
I've been the manager of the Grand Metropolitan Hotel for roughly 6 years.
And what are your responsibilities at the hotel?
I oversee just about everything that takes place in the hotel. This includes hiring staff, making sure security is good, and checking in groups at conferences.
Could you please describe these conferences?
Well, one such conference is the Metropolitan Youth Leadership Conference that we hold every year in our hotel. We have roughly 600 to 900 high school students from all over New Jersey who attend. In such conferences, we make sure to increase security in our hotel to better protect our students.
And how do you increase security?
Well, we have one to two security cameras per hallway, and we have security guards throughout the hotel. In conferences, we make sure to have more security guards than usual.
Earlier you said you're responsible for checking in groups at these conferences. Do you recall checking in the Smithville delegation?
Yes, I recall checking them in, and at the time I spoke to Mr. Fisher, who informed me that Miss Hughes couldn't make it due to having appendicitis.
And does your hotel provide any food?
Yes, we have a number of restaurants on the first floor, and there's vending machines throughout every floor of the hotel.
Your Honor, may I approach the witness and join Exhibit 5?
Yes, you may.
Do you recognize this document?
Yes, this is the floor plan of the 8th floor of the Grand Metropolitan Hotel. This is the floor where Mr. Fisher and his students resided in during the conference.
If a student from Smithville were to walk from their room to Mr. Fisher's room, what would they pass on the way?
Oh, they would pass several rooms and a vending machine right over here.
Does your hotel provide any other vending machines?
Oh yes, we have snack machines on the first floor, and there are soda machines on every floor.
Now later that night, did you talk to Mr. Fisher again?
Oh yes, I spoke to him on the first night, and I informed him that the floor that his students was on was relatively quiet, so he could do a second curfew check with tape, just like Miss Hughes taught me years ago.
How could he do this?
Well, you put a piece of tape onto a door, and you make sure, and so if a student would open the door, the tape would damage, and therefore that tells you whether the student left during the night.
And later that night, how were you informed of the accident?
Well, I was informed by the front desk at roughly 3 a.m. in the morning. Right after, I called Mr. Fisher's room, and I bumped into him in the hallway.
What was his reaction to the news?
Well, he looked pretty upset, and he grumbled about a college party that was supposed to be happening. Then he went to check on his students to find out any more information and to guarantee their safety.
Thank you. No further questions.
Cross?
Yes, Your Honor. Now, Mr. Damon, did you talk to Mr. Fisher before the conference?
Yes, I spoke to him on the first night.
Oh, no, before the conference, like prior to the
Yes.
whole event?
No, I did not speak to him at all.
So you did not try to get any sort of confirmation with you about the hotel or any other details of the conference?
I spoke to the superintendent of the school already,
But you did not talk to Mr. Fisher?
not to Mr. Fisher.
Okay. Regarding the food quality, you banned students from using hotel restaurants, correct?
Well, yes, I did.
And Mr. Fisher had prohibited the students from ordering room service, correct?
Yes, a ton of schools do this with their hotels because they build up tabs.
And he also ordered that the mini fridges be empty of food, correct?
Yes, the same problem. They build up tabs with the
Okay, thank
hotels.
you. Now, Fisher had mentioned planning to see a Star Wars movie during the conference to you, correct?
I believe it's on the second day and not the first night.
But he mentioned he wanted to see this movie, correct?
Yes, he did.
And was he aware of the midnight premiere?
Yes, we were aware and we laughed at the people who went to it.
And when you talked about the second curfew check, you said that you taught him the tape method, correct?
Yes, and Miss Hughes taught it to me earlier, and she's been using it for every year she's ever done the conference with students.
Now, was Fisher aware of this method before the conference?
No, he was not. I believe not.
And when you notified Mr. Fisher about or how did you try to notify Fisher about the accident?
Oh, I called him through his room phone.
Did he answer?
No, he's not, but I believe he was awakened by it because he later talked to me about the information that I previously called him.
Now, did Fisher ever give you his emergency contact info or his own phone number?
Oh no, it was much too short notice.
Now, you said you bumped into Fisher in the hallway, correct?
Oh yes, I bumped into him on the 8th floor.
So he was outside, not in his room, correct?
Oh, he was just recently awoken, so he went to check on students.
Now, just to recap, so you tried to call his room phone number, but you couldn't reach him, correct? He did not answer.
He didn't answer, yes, but it seems he was awoken by it and heard the message that I left behind.
And he never gave you his phone number or emergency contact info?
No, he did not.
Okay, no further questions, Your Honor.
Yes, Your Honor. Well, was there a need to contact Mr. Fisher before the conference started?
No, there was not. I spoke with the superintendent already, and I made sure to clear the details with them.
And if a student really needed food in a restaurant, would they have been allowed to?
Yes, I feel that if there was really a medical emergency, we would surely have. Our restaurants were open. They were just close to students. They were still functioning just fine, so we could have got food to them quickly.
And when did Mr. Fisher say he wanted to see the movie?
Well, he informed me that he wanted to see it on the second night during any free time that he had, just like how the students had free time.
Thank you. No further questions.
Recross?
No, Your Honor.
Okay. Witness be put down. Thank you. The defense may call their third witness to the stand.
Yes, Your Honor. The defense calls Dalton Fisher to stand.
Raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Please be seated.
Mr. Fisher, what do you do for a living?
I'm a full-time history teacher at Smithville High School.
And what is your background in education?
Previously, I have taught at Metropolitan High School for 1 year, and I'm now in my third year at Smithville. I received excellent evaluations as both a teacher and a volunteer.
How else are you involved in school?
I try to get involved as much as possible, just as long as it doesn't interfere with my duties as a teacher. I currently volunteer for the debate club.
Do you know why you're here tonight?
I am well aware of the fact that Pat Reynolds, a student at the 2013 Metropolitan Youth Leadership Conference, slipped and fell off of a wall after she left her room past the established curfew. She is now in a coma, and her mother wishes to sue for negligence.
And prior to the accident, what was your relationship with Pat Reynolds?
I never had a relationship with Pat. I've never had her as a student.
So how were you introduced to the Metropolitan Youth Leadership Conference?
Dana Hughes, the typical head moderator for the conference, approached me and asked if I was willing to be a chaperone, and I agreed to it.
And what was your relationship with Dana?
Well, I've worked with Dana for a couple of years now, and like I said, she's typically the head moderator for the conference. We were supposed to co-chaperone it last year. Unfortunately, she could not make it.
Why not?
At the very last minute, Dana was stricken with appendicitis and she could not attend the conference.
So how did the school handle Ms. Hughes' situation?
Dr. Jameson Manning, the superintendent of the Smithfield School District, informed me that the hotel had a policy allowing 20 students for every one teacher. I did not have a problem with this policy.
So how were you informed of your duties as a chaperone?
Both Dr. Manning and Dana Hughes informed me in great detail of rules, policies, and expectations regarding the safety and supervision of students during overnight activities.
Well, what about the students? Were they informed of the rules?
Dana held one mandatory meeting for all the students about a week before the trip. She discussed all the rules and policies and expectations of the students. She also sent letters home to all of the parents, and parents and students had to sign a waiver saying that they understood all of these rules.
Did you yourself remind the students of the rules on the trip?
I did. After arriving at the hotel, I re-informed them of their expectations for about 15 or 20 minutes.
And what did you tell them?
I informed them that they were not allowed out of their rooms past the first established curfew, which was 11 o'clock. I also told them that they were not allowed to eat at any of the hotel restaurants because our school did not want them running up a large tab.
And how did you enforce the curfew that night?
At 11 o'clock, my first curfew check, I first went around and made sure that all students were in their rooms. Casey Damon, the manager of the hotel, informed me of a trick that Dana used of placing a piece of masking tape on each door. I used it at 11 o'clock.
And how were you made aware of the accident?
I was awakened by a phone call from Casey Damon at around 3 a.m.
And what did you do next?
At that time, I had become aware of the possibility of a party happening at Metropolitan University. However, I informed my students that they were not allowed to attend this party whatsoever.
Thank you. No further questions.
Cross?
Your Honor. Now, Mr. Fisher, isn't it true that you've had no prior experience of chaperoning before?
That is correct. The 2013 conference was my first experience with chaperone.
And you did not attend a meeting to go over trip plans with students, correct?
I did not. I was busy grading papers for my class.
Now, this meeting was mandatory, correct?
It was mandatory for the students, yes.
Now, the reason that you couldn't attend was that you forgot, correct?
I did forget, which was a mistake, but my presence there was unnecessary given that I already knew my rules and expectations. The meeting was for the students.
Okay, now Dana Hughes was the one who collected most of the permission forms and provided information to the students about the trip, correct?
She did. Like I said, she was the head moderator for the conference.
And there was a Star Wars premiere during this weekend that you wanted to see, correct?
There was.
All right. Now, regarding the food situation, you prohibited students from ordering room service, correct?
Yes, similar to closing the restaurants off to them. I didn't want them running up a large tab at the school.
And you ordered that all the fridges be empty of food, correct?
Of course. Like, not wanting them to have a big tab, I also
Okay,
did not want
thank
them
you.
consuming any
You
alcohol
answered my
beverages.
question. Okay. Now, so you basically disable the students' abilities to get food from their room, correct?
I don't believe that is true, no.
I mean, like, they wouldn't have access to
Food that was in their rooms from the fridge, no. I didn't. I made sure that the fridges were empty.
Okay. So, regarding the curfew checks, isn't it true that you did not physically see if each and every student was in his or her room? Now, so did you actually see if each and every student was in their room?
There were a few circumstances where I only saw one of the students, but mostly I saw both.
Yes or no, did you see if each student was in his or her room?
I saw most of the students, not every single one of them.
Okay, regarding the second curfew check, you used the tape method, correct?
Actually, I put the tape on the door after my first curfew check at 11, making sure that, after I made sure that the students were in their room.
So during your second curfew check, you did not see if there were any students were inside their room?
No, I did not. I merely checked the tape on the doors.
And you said you had these suspicions about these students going to a college party, so you still just relied on tape as a curfew check?
I did. I trusted my students. They were pre-selected based on their behaviors, and I believe that they would follow all of the rules given to them.
Anyway, regarding this taping method, was this a method the school instructed you to use?
No, Casey Damon, the manager of the hotel, told me, although he did say that Dana Hughes had been using it for quite some time.
Now, did the students know about this method?
Not originally, no, not at first.
But did you inform them that you used tape, correct?
I informed them on the second day after the incident.
Aren't you aware of the tricks to get past the tape?
I am aware. However, like I said, I trusted my students with their behavior.
So basically on your second check, you
And I relied on my students. I trusted them.
Now, Didn't you answer, wait, sorry. Is it true that you did not answer your door when Pat knocked around 11:25 p.m.?
Pat never knocked on my door. Of course I would have answered if she did.
Now, how did you find out about this accident?
I was awakened by a phone call from Casey Damon at around 3 a.m.
So, did you call her back, or call him back?
I did not. I got up right away and I left my room to make sure that my other students were safe.
Did you ever notify Pat's mother about the accident?
Shop on the trip. Were you planning on seeing a movie?
Originally, yes, I was.
But after Miss Hughes got sick, did you see a movie at all during the conference?
I did not know.
Thank you. No further questions.
Recross?
No, Your Honor.
Thank you. That's the defense rests their case.
Your Honor, before we rest, we'd like to move joint exhibits 1 through 5 in evidence.
That's fine. Any objections from plaintiff?
No, Your Honor.
So moved.
The
Thank
defense
you.
rests.
At this time, we're going to give them
5 minutes.
5 minutes to work on their closing statements. I would ask that everybody leave the student attorneys alone while they work on them. Thank you.
We warned the students about a nearby college party. Pat's roommate, the plaintiff's own witness, testified that Mr. Fisher specifically told the students not to go to said college party. This expert for hire also alleged that Mr. Fisher did not make himself available to students at all times. However, the plaintiff failed to call one eyewitness who was seeking out Dalton Fisher, but was unable to see him. You even heard Dalton Fisher testify himself that no one, including Pat Reynolds, knocked on his door at any time during the first night of the conference. Bailey Thompson also said that Dalton Fisher had no signatures on the field trip procedures form. Yet she testified that his signature was in fact on that form 2 times. The rest of the complaints just don't have too much bearing on the case at hand here. Even if the school had done things like given more time for permission slips to be signed or had a different medical procedure, the same actions would have ensued and we would still be here today. Next, did Dalton Fisher follow all the rules of the conference? The conference has a student-to-teacher ratio requirement of 20 to 1. Smithville definitely met this requirement. This policy was first brought up to the attention of Dr. James Manning by Peyton Reynolds, the other plaintiff in this case. This plaintiff wanted the trip to go on, even when she knew that the main chaperone would be unable to attend. She was the one who asked the school to use this 21 policy, and now she is suing the school for doing exactly what she told them to. She did not even list food as a necessary medical cure for Pat's dizzy spells when she was specifically asked to do so on the permission slip. One evening, when Casey Damon and Dalton Fisher were able to have a conversation, Damon told Mr. Fisher that his students were being very quiet at night and they were behaving themselves. Damon then informed Mr. Fisher of a trick using tape to make sure that the students would stay in the rooms at night. And during the 2 curfew checks he conducted, found that none of the tape had been damaged. Finally, could Mr. Fisher have done anything to prevent Pat from breaking the rules? This question is the most important one, as when the trial concludes, you will have to fill out a jury verdict sheet, which asks you which party you believe was negligent, and whether this negligence was the proximate cause of accident and injury to Pat Reynolds. Let's take a look at all the safeguards the school put in place in order to make sure that the students did not break the rules. There was an approved student-to-teacher ratio. The chaperone was briefed about going on the trip alone. The students were told not to leave after curfew. The students were told not to go to a nearby college party. A curfew check was done at 11 p.m. Tape was put on the doors. A curfew check was done at 12 p.m. There were security cameras in each hotel hallway, and the hotel had hired extra security guards. Those were 9 safeguards. But even with all this in place, if a student really wanted to break out of the hotel after curfew, they could. But what more was the school supposed to do? Should Mr. Fisher have waited out in the hotel hallway all night? Should an alarm have gone off when a student's door opened? Should security guards protect every single person leaving the hotel? What 10th safeguard would have been realistic, yet prevented students from breaking the rules under any circumstances? Realistically, there isn't one. The school had done its part in trying to prevent students from breaking the rules, but at the end of the day, it's the student's decision as to whether or not they choose to follow them. Dalton Fisher had done his duty to make sure that students were not supposed to break the rules, but ultimately, it was the plaintiff's decision to break them. And what was Pat really doing that night? Was she only looking for food for her dizziness? Casey Damon testified that there were snack machines on the first floor of the hotel. Even when they couldn't find these snack machines, they decided to wander outside of the hotel. They seemed to have left for approximately 3 hours, and Pat's roommate testified that they were only gone for 1. Not only that, but in this either 1 or 3 hour scenario, they only went 3 city blocks. So what is to account for that large gap of time? Are we to believe that they were only walking that short distance for such a long period of time? Or is it more likely that they were headed for Metropolitan University to go to the college party they were told not to go to by their responsible teacher, Mr. Fisher? And on the other hand, if Pat were actually feeling dizzy, why did she jump on top of a wall? It's common sense that jumping on top of a wall while dizzy is a bad idea because falling off is almost inevitable. In fact, right before Pat jumped on the wall, she told her roommate that she was dizzy, yet proceeded to perform this dangerous stunt. Isn't this negligence on the plaintiff's part for not taking proper care of herself and performing this risky activity? The plaintiff's star witness was Pat's roommate, but can we really trust this source as credible? She said he was his least favorite teacher, that she received her lowest grade in that class, that they often butted heads when he preached policy, that he was a trust fund baby. Worst of all, she said that Mr. Fisher was not much of a human being. Does this sound like a witness that can objectively tell the facts? Once again, the accident that happened on the Smithville School field trip was definitely horrible. And again, we give our condolences to the Reynolds family. But even in these circumstances, it is wrong for a family to try to claim damages just to make themselves feel better. In this case, the plaintiff must prove their series of claims beyond a preponderance of evidence. However, they will fail to meet that preponderance because what they are trying to prove is less likely true than not. We are confident that after you review all of the evidence, you will return with the correct verdict. Not liable.
Plaintiff wants to give their closing statement.
Yes, Your Honor. Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, we are gathered here tonight to seek justice for Pat Reynolds, who is still in a coma due to the poor judgment and oversight by both the chaperone, Dalton Fisher, and the Smithville School District. Now, my client, Ms. Peyton Reynolds, I thought that her daughter was embarking on a fun and educational trip to the Metropolitan Beaches. Little did she know that her vivacious daughter would return home in a coma. Now, how could something so disastrous happen on a school field trip? Now, based on the evidence we presented to you today and what you've heard, the answer is clear. Pat Reynolds is a victim of the negligence of Dalton Fisher and the Smithville School District. Now, for a school field trip, we expect that the school would be able to protect and ensure the safety of our children. That is their duty of care. Now, the defense has tried to shift the blame away from Mr. Fisher and the Smithville School District. But remember, Pat Reynolds is a child, a student, and the school has a responsibility to ensure her safety. Now, there were multiple instances in which Pat's catastrophic injury could have been prevented, but the school had failed to do so. Now, from the very beginning, this trip was poorly managed. First of all, Mr. Jameson Manning had allowed the trip to continue despite violating his 15-to-1 student-to-chaperone ratio, instead allowing 20 students to go with one incompetent chaperone, twice the recommended amount that our expert witness, Ms. Bailey Thompson, had testified to. Now, why did he do this? Because of the information from one parent about hotel ratios. Furthermore, this sole chaperone responsible for all these students admitted that he had no prior experience as a chaperone, and he forgot to attend the mandatory meeting to go over trip plans with students. Now, moreover, our expert witness, Ms. Thompson, had testified that this sole chaperone was not properly trained. While the defense would have you believe that Peyton Reynolds is somewhat at fault by allowing her daughter to go on this trip, she had made this decision based on the school's assurance that they would protect her daughter. Unfortunately, during this trip, the Smithville School District and its chaperone Dalton Fisher demonstrated that they could not properly handle a student's medical issues. Now, first of all, they had problematic procedures. Now, my client, Ms. Peyton Reynolds, had informed the school about her daughter's medical condition of dizzy spells. However, as Ms. Thompson testified, this school had no established procedures to deal with medical emergencies. Regardless, Pat had tried to notify Fisher twice about her medical distress, but the first time she was dismissed and turned away, and the second time, Mr. Fisher did not answer his door. Now, she could not contact him by phone because he had not provided them with some emergency contact info. Anyway, we had heard from Peyton Reynolds that food helps Pat combat her dizziness. But Mr. Fisher admitted that he had prohibited room service and required that the mini fridges be emptied of food. So finding no food in her room and no help from Mr. Fisher, Pat thus had to find food elsewhere to address her medical emergency. Which brings me to my next point. Where was the proper adult? Now, he admitted during both curfew checks he did not see if each and every student was in their rooms. Now, even worse, he relied only on flimsy pieces of tape, which he knew there were tricks to get by. He even had suspicions that students may want to go to some college party, yet he only relied on these pieces of tape. Later on, after Pat fell, Fisher once again proved unreachable at the most vital times. He had never given his phone number to students. But shouldn't students be able to contact their chaperones at any given moment in case of an emergency? Now, Casey Damon had also confirmed Dalton's unreachability. Mr. Fisher had never provided the hotel with his phone number, and he did not answer the room phone call. Interestingly, Fisher had also told Damon beforehand that he wanted and planned to see this new Star Wars movie, priorities over watching his own students. Finally, when notified of the accident, Mr. Fisher did not contact Pat's mother about it, the person who's most concerned about her daughter's safety. Instead, her first call about the accident was from Avery, not the school, not the chaperone, the people who were responsible for her daughter's safety. Now, where was the adult supervision? So there were numerous instances in which Pat's disastrous injury could have been prevented. Now, if he had rooms to students, and if he had been accessible to students by providing some sort of means of emergency contact. Now, if the Smithville School District had abided by its own student-to-chaperone ratio, and if they had established procedures to deal with medical emergencies, Pat wouldn't have had to take these drastic measures to deal with her medical emergency. Now, ladies and gentlemen, the plaintiff has been able to prove, based on the preponderance of evidence,
Their own policy regarding the student-to-teacher ratio, yet the superintendent testified that they did not violate their own policy.
Your response?
well, they violated their previously established 15-to-1 student-to-chaperone ratio. That was...
And it was listed as such in Joint Exhibit 2 under Section A, under letter A, 1 faculty member per 15 students on the trip.
Yeah, overall.
It's been stipulated in the workbook that the jury knew the jury instructions, so at this time I'm going to ask that they go back and deliberate. You guys need to announce a winner, either the plaintiff or the defense when you come out. And at this time, the judges will score.
And you guys can go back and count, right? Remember, you're the foreperson. You're in charge. They're not going to be announcing the winner, nor are they going to be announcing the best attorney or best witness. However, Mr. Foreperson, do you have the jury verdict?
Your Honor, the jury finds the defendant responsible 65% and the plaintiff 35%.
Thank you very much. At this time, I guess we'll give the team some feedback. First of all, I thought both teams did an excellent job. You were very poised, collected, you clearly knew the material, and that goes for not only the attorneys but the witnesses. It was a very, very good round. I've been doing this for a lot of years. It's probably one of the best I've seen. So congratulations to you guys. It was great. I thought that There was a couple of things that you can continue to work on as you proceed through the competition. There was a couple of he/she mix-ups, which you're not going to have in real life because you're going to know who your opponent is, your adversary. But here, where you're going against different schools and the witnesses change genders, that's a little more difficult. But it's just something to work on. There was a couple times where the he and she's got mixed up. I thought there was a good balance between when you needed to refer to your notes or to exhibits. It was very well done. You didn't rely on them too heavily, but they were there in case you needed them, so that was a great job. You had excellent timing for both schools. You're very succinct. Nobody went over time or even close to time, so that was great. Again, that shows that you're very well prepared and you know your material. I don't know if there's anything you want to add while I review.
You know, when you go second, she hit all the high points. I agree with everything she said. When it comes to the notes, I think you guys did a good job. To the extent that some of you didn't use notes at all, or used them very infrequently, that was good as well. The time we had talked about this beforehand, we figured we'd be here till 8:15. You guys knew everything. You were very succinct, and in real practice, that's important. I mean, in a real trial, you don't want them falling asleep. You don't want the judge falling asleep. And when you start getting to extraneous information, it's not really necessary to the case. That's what happens. So keeping it clear and crisp was very good, and everybody did that. The witnesses, the attorneys, across the board, you all did that very, very well. I think the attorneys all spoke to the jury. I know I had a tough time seeing witnesses. I tried to do this, but I think the witnesses, for the most part, all spoke to the jury too, which was important. The eye contact, the inflections. I think overall it was a really, really good job. This is my first one. I've done some appellate ones, which are more boring. But I was overall very impressed. You exceeded my expectations when I sat down here.
You guys have any questions for the judges or anything? Something that you wonder about what you did, and
You know, come up and approach us too.
yeah, you don't have to ask it like in front of everybody, but like if there's a thing you asked or you did, or any of the witnesses, if you said something that you're not sure if that was the right way to say it, and you want to talk to the judges for a couple minutes.
Why we screwed up the objections.
Yeah.
Things like that.
Oh, that was the other thing. You had a good handle on objections, which I think is very hard, and something even